Internationally acclaimed author Brent Meersman's latest book is titled Rattling the Cage, Reflections on Democratic South Africa. In this book, he aims to take the reader on an informed tour of the new South African reality. Brent tags us along on the country's highs and the lows by addressing some of its failures and successes over the 27 years of democracy. Brent joins us now via Zoom to tell us more about what this book is all about. Brent, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning.
Tell us about what this book is all about and more on the title, Rattling the Cage.
Right. Well, we all tell ourselves stories, stories about ourselves, our own lives, and human beings are storytellers. And it occurred to me that countries also have a story. There's a story we tell ourselves about our nation, and about how it was formed and how things happened, why they happened, and we form opinions of the past. And sometimes we don't revise those changes. We don't actually scrutinize and analyze exactly what has happened and why are we where we are today. So that's what I set out to do with Rattling the Cage, was exactly that. I'm no longer young enough to know everything. So I decided, and I've also reached that age where, the radical heart is starting to give way to a conservative brain, who's thinking about everything. And so I sat down and I looked through our past and I said, okay, the story that we told ourselves, the story that I told myself. I've been writing about this country for 20 years. And what happens is, especially columnists, we under a lot of pressure to express ourselves prematurely. And then new facts come to light and there's new information. We don't always update what we wrote before. We become aware of it, but that impression somehow lingers. It still sits there like a first impression. And I thought, let me really reevaluate the story I've been telling myself about our country. Let me reevaluate and analyze. Did I get it right? Am I sure of my positions? All these questions. There's a lot of noise and confusion. We live in a wonderfully noisy democracy. So you hear, Mandela was a sellout. In 1994 Constitution was, we were sold a bill of goods. De Klerk was pushed, he didn't jump. How is it after 27 years of black majority rule, the country looks the way it does today? No jobs, little land. So those are all the kind of issues that I wanted to investigate and revisit, basically.
Now, Brent, just take us through some of the views on how South Africa has been shaped that you share in the book. I mean, you aim to take the reader on an informed tour of the South African reality, and do paint a picture for us, if you can, of what the South African reality is and how it sort of looks like.
Well, that's a small question. Yes. Well, so what's happened is that, there's lots of things that I believed, which I still hold to. But what I've discovered is that the reality is much more nuanced than the kind of glib opinions that people express. And I don't want to express too many glib opinions this morning. The book has got a lot of nuance in it and a lot of unpacking of what is, what has actually happened. But I would say that, we're not as far along as we had hoped to be. And what are the reasons for that? So I start with the political transformation, the Mandela years and de Klerk, and what was that political settlement all about? And was Mandela a sellout? I then look at the economic transformation. Now, what happened that we landed up with neoliberal, that people came out of exile believing in a much more socialism with a big S. And then we landed up with a neoliberal capitalist, that people weren't so much sellouts, they became zealots over neoliberalism. And then how did that economic transformation work? Was the Mbeki period, as it was called, the 1996 class project, was it the kind of unmitigated failure that the left want to paint it? I don't think it was, which is a change in my own views. So go through the economic transformation. Then I have a look at the social transformation, especially the TRC. And what did that mean? Was there really any possibility of this kind of reconciliation? Was it just part of an elite pact? Was it just part of the constitutional settlement that we achieved, and the compromises that were involved in that? And then using that as a basis, I also throughout the book examine the role that emotions have played. You know, the stories that we tell ourselves and your story of what's happened in South Africa and during the transition is probably largely shaped by emotional responses and your experience of that transformation, whether it was good for you or it wasn't good for you, whether you felt included or whether you felt left out. And so the chapters actually begin, each chapter, and looking at a different aspect, concentrates on a particular emotion, like anger, humiliation, dignity, sadness, even love, compassion. So all the chapters actually have titles. And I use that idea of the emotion in terms of how it has actually shaped us in our political beliefs and in the beliefs that we hold about the country.
You know, Brent, you've just spoke. You've just spoke about very important topics such as neoliberal capitalism and socialism, which are very important topics, I must say, and they need a separate platform and an interview. And you say that you've had to re-examine your views of South Africa, past and present. Tell us about how these views have changed.
Well, I think that, I pretty much believe that there had been a lot of interference from business in the constitutional settlement, and that we had, putting it as sellout is very strongly because that's an accusation and it's kind of an expression of anger, and it's a little bit immature. But what I would say is that, yes, the settlement, business, there was a lot of business leverage, and that basically we had a political change, but not an economic change. And that political change was to maintain the system, basically. It was absolutely imperative that capitalism be maintained. And apartheid as a cumulative strategy was no longer working. And so it had to be tweaked and it had to be adjusted. And I sort of thought that we had a political change at the same time. And then I suddenly realized that the political change wasn't as big as I had originally thought. And that very much the country was moving in a particular direction. Now, where my view changed was that I don't think that the choices were as clear as I thought they were. So with other words, I would say, let's say I don't believe Mandela was a sellout in any way, and I argue that very, very strongly. The intelligent question to ask is that could we have got more? Could we have got a better settlement? And then how did that happen that we didn't get a better agreement? Why didn't we stand up to international finance and international capital? Why did we buckle to the extent that we did? And I'm looking at that in terms of the institutional networks that we had, and where our position was at that time. So they're subtle arguments. They're not things that I can just say, this is exactly how it was. But I can explain, and I hope that the book acts then as a guide, which people can help them think about the issues and can think about things in a little bit more of a nuanced way and understand how we came to be where we are. I think I now have a better understanding of that.
All right. Well, Brent, unfortunately, we are out of time. As I've mentioned, we need a separate platform and a separate interview for this, for this kind of discussion. And I know that this book will rattle a couple of feathers, especially by those who don't necessarily agree with the views that are stated therein. But it is a very thought-provoking book that will get us talking and, just conversing about the issues that we face on a daily basis. We do appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's author Brent Meersman, and he's been speaking to us about his latest book titled Rattling the Cage, Reflections on Democratic South Africa.